Okay, so page 51 goes on to talk about the standards of evaluation. I'm just going to read this and we're going to talk about it. Okay, so one way of stating the thesis that there are no objective values is to say that value statements cannot be either true or false. But this formulation too lends itself to misinterpretation. For there are certain kinds of value statements which undoubtedly can be true or false, even if, in the sense I intend, there are no objective values. Evaluations of many sorts are commonly made in relation to agreed and assumed standards: the classing of wool, the grading of apples, the awarding of prizes at sheepdog trials, flower shows, skating and diving championships, and even the marking of examination papers are carried out in relation to standards of quality or merit, which are peculiar to each particular subject matter or type of contest, which may be explicitly laid down, but which, even if they are nowhere explicitly stated, are fairly well understood and agreed upon by those who are recognized as judges or experts in each particular field. Given any sufficiently determinate standards, it will be an objective issue, a matter of truth and falsehood, how well any particular specimen measures up to those standards. Comparative judgments, in particular, will be capable of truth and falsehood. It will be a factual question whether the sheepdog has performed better than that one. Obviously, this is true, right? So, going back to the jelly example, right? We could objectively determine as a group which jelly is better. Just like if we were judging sheepdog trials and we were given a rubric of some sort, we could determine which sheepdog performed best based on which one herded the sheep best, which one ran faster, right? I don't know exactly what they're looking for in that, but you get the idea. So even though we couldn't come up with one that necessarily we would all agree on, right? We're all subjects and we all feel differently about things. We could objectively as a group come up with standards. Okay, so I'm going to keep reading. The subjectivist about values then is not denying that there can be objective evaluations relative to standards and that these are as possible in the aesthetic and moral fields as is in any of those just mentioned. More than this, there is an objective distinction which applies in many such fields, and yet would itself be regarded as a peculiarly moral one: the distinction between justice and injustice. In one important sense of the word, it is a paradigm case of injustice if a court declares someone to be guilty of an offense of which it knows him to be innocent. More generally, a finding is unjust if it is at variance with what the relevant laws and the facts together require, and particularly if it is known by the court to be so. More generally still, any award of marks, prizes, or the like is unjust if it is at variance with the agreed standards for the contest in question. If one diver's performance in fact measures up better to the accepted standards for diving than another's, it will be unjust if the latter is awarded higher marks or the prize. In this way, the justice or injustice of decisions relative to standards can be a thoroughly objective matter, though there may still be a subjective element in the interpretation or application of standards. But the statement that a certain decision is thus just or unjust will not be objectively prescriptive. Insofar as it can be simply true, it leaves open the question whether there is any objective requirement to do what is just and to refrain from what is unjust, and equally leaves open the practical decision to act in either way. What he's getting at here is that by definition, we can determine if something is just or unjust, right? Now, there's nothing that tells us whether acting justly or unjustly is correct, but we can determine whether we are acting that way in accordance with those rules. Recognizing the objectivity of justice in relation to standards and of evaluative judgments relative to standards then merely shifts the question of the objectivity of values back to the standards themselves. So what he's saying here is we're going back to the standards themselves. Let's go back to judging jelly. If we are saying that we care about the taste, the smell, the ingredients, the color, the texture, all of these things, right? We said initially, let's say that taste was of utmost importance. And then let's say we said that smell was number 2 importance. And look, color, all that kind of stuff is number 3 importance. We could go back to those standards as a group, evaluate them, and say, actually, I think numbers 2 and 3 of value should be switched because one is more important than the other. Does that make sense? So, I apologize. So, the way that we evaluate things is somewhat subjective. Um, in that the rubric can change, right? So our evaluations of morality can change as a group. They don't just come out of nowhere. So our rubrics can slightly change. So we might look for a different kind of thing when we're objectively measuring how good a jelly is. But those standards are still in place. So basically what J.L. Mackey says is that even though it's true that some of our moral statements about whether abortion is wrong or whether the death penalty wrong are merely value statements, we can still measure certain things based on standards or rubrics that we come up with. So we could say, based on the standards of this society, this is more immoral, right? Because as a group, we still have value statements that we believe in general to be true. So we could say that it is the value of our society to not have the death penalty, for example, right? We could say that we think that that is a bad thing to do based on these other value statements, like we value life, we value a commitment to keeping up with other industrialized nations, and upholding a nonviolent statement, something like that. I'm just using that as an example, of course. So the idea is that while morality is subjective, the way we evaluate issues is not actually very subjective. It's based on a rubric or a standards of evaluation that are subject to change, but they don't arbitrarily change. Anyways, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Bye.